semua pelabur maupun kepada pelbagai peniaga yang di dalam rantai nilai berkelas itu sendiri. Jadi upaya Malaysia untuk memberikan kestabilan kepada perdagangan ini, kita dapat lihat bahawa lonjakan bukan hanya output tetapi ekspor juga meningkat, bukan hanya pada bulan November tetapi pada bulan Oktober yang lalu, di mana Malaysia mencetakkan pertumbuhan perdagangan yang lebihan dagangan yang cukup baik. Dan ini juga menunjukkan bahawa selepas berlalunya, saya bukan kata era Trump tetapi apa yang katakan apabila selepas Trump telah menyelesaikan pelbagai isu tarif yang dia telah mulakan pada bulan Oktober yang lalu, maka dunia sudah kembali menstrukturkan kembali, perdagangan dunia menstrukturkan kembali bagaimanakah mereka nak menangani isu yang telah bermula daripada pentadbiran Trump itu sendiri. Jadi sesuatu yang bagus di mana kita melihat bukan hanya dari segi perdagangan tapi juga dari segi PMI, iaitu indeks pembuatan Malaysia juga telah meningkat. Jadi ini sesuatu yang begitu positif kepada ekonomi kita sebenarnya, Nina.
Ini adalah prestasi yang agak positif apabila kita melihat menjelang hujung tahun, dan kita teliti juga ni orders yang naik paling laju sejak April 2022 dan optimism tertinggi sejak 2013. Tapi production masih lembab dan ekspor hanya hampir stabil. Apa yang data ini sebenarnya beritahu kita tentang kualiti pemulihan? Kuat ataupun sebenarnya masih rapuh, Prof?
Seperti saya katakan tadi, Nina, kita di dalam situasi penstrukturan semula di mana keseluruhan rantaian nilai bekalan dalam pelbagai industri termasuk yang terutama sekali pada semiconductor melihat bagaimanakah mereka dapat mempunyai satu base yang lebih stabil, membuat ujaran dan pada masa yang sama juga meningkatkan produktiviti. Jadi kalau kita nak katakan dia kuat, belum lagi, tetapi ia satu langkah yang pragmatik, yang progresif, dan kita akan melihat bagaimanakah ekspor ini boleh terus meningkat apabila kita punya landasan yang baik untuk tahun 2026. Dan inilah satu momentum yang baik perlu dikekalkan untuk tahun 2026 bila kita pada suku ketiga dan pada suku keempat, selepas kita memeteraikan perjanjian dan sebagainya, kita mempunyai situasi yang baik berbanding dengan banyak-banyak negara di seluruh Asia Tenggara maupun di dunia yang masih lagi berperang dengan tarif Amerika Syarikat. Jadi apa yang kita dapat lihat ini adalah satu data yang kita katakan konkret yang menunjukkan bahawa kita berada pada era penstrukturan semula, era pemulihan, dan ia tak boleh kata tapi ia masih dalam keadaan progresif dan boleh meningkatkan lagi kestabilan yang kita ada untuk membawa momentum ini kepada yang lebih baik dan lebih resilient untuk tahun 2026.
Seterusnya kita akan melihat kepada skala yang lebih besar kepada sektor-sektor lain, seperti kalau kita meliti struktur ekonomi, kita masih banyak disokong sektor perkhidmatan. Manakala pembuatan sekitar suku kepada sepertiga ekonomi. Bila PMI pembuatan mula pulih semakin stabil, dilihat punya prospek yang berangsangkan, sejauh mana ia boleh spill over kepada perkhidmatan, jobs dan pendapatan isi rumah pada 2025 hingga tempoh 2026 ini, Prof?
Baik, tak dinafikan. Sektor pembuatan menyumbangkan kira-kira 15 ke 20% daripada kira angka kita. Manakala sektor perkhidmatan menyumbangkan lebih daripada 50%, hampir 60% pada ekonomi Malaysia. Namun begitu, sektor perindustrian yang kita mahu ataupun sektor pembuatan yang kita mahu, ia memberikan nilai rantaian ataupun menjadi satu catalyst atau pemangkin kepada ekonomi dunia. Pada ekonomi kita sendiri, dan ia juga boleh memberikan spill over ataupun domino effect yang positif kepada pelbagai sektor. Bila sektor pembuatan bertambah baik, maka sektor-sektor seperti perkhidmatan, makanan, runcit, dan juga termasuk juga membantu dalam mengurangkan lagi kadar pengangguran, penciptaan pekerjaan baru, membangunkan lagi vendor-vendor ataupun SME peniaga kecil dan sederhana untuk mereka terus menjadi vendor atau penyokong kepada sektor pembuatan itu sendiri. Jadi sesungguhnya sektor pembuatan itu, apa yang kita mahu bukanlah kita mahu satu sektor pembuatan yang katakan menggunakan nilai buruh yang rendah. Kita sudah mempunyai National Industry Plan yang menjuruskan kepada peningkatan atau pemilihan kepada pelbagai pelaburan yang bernilai tinggi supaya perindustrian kita, tahap industri berbeza dengan negara yang pada masa ini bersaing untuk menjadi pengeluar kos yang rendah.
Juga ini juga merupakan peluang untuk PKS dan SME Malaysia, dan dari sudut SME pembuatan, bila mereka nampak order book makin penuh tapi kos bahan mentah dan tax pressure yang makin naik, apa kombinasi polisi dan akses pembiayaan yang paling kritikal supaya mereka berani automate, digitize dan ambil pekerja baharu?
Baik, dalam isu ini adalah of course selalunya ada dua faktor utama pada faktor kewangan. Bagaimanakah mereka mempunyai modal pusingan yang cukup untuk terus membina ataupun meningkatkan operasi mereka supaya mereka boleh memenuhi permintaan ataupun order yang itu pertama. Kedua, pembiayaan ini boleh diberikan oleh kerajaan ataupun agensi kerajaan yang ada seperti SME dan sebagainya lagi. Yang keduanya adalah dari segi kepakaran atau tenaga buruh yang mahir dalam usaha uh, untuk memberikan perkhidmatan atau memberikan sokongan kepada syarikat-syarikat besar. Dan apa yang kita mahukan adalah supaya SME Malaysia ini bukan hanya tumbuh di Malaysia, tetapi mereka juga menjadi penyokong kepada industri ini, walaupun mereka industri yang besar ataupun MNC berada di luar negara. Jadi keperluan untuk mereka memerlukan bantuan kewangan, mereka memerlukan juga sokongan dari segi aspek kemahiran untuk supaya tenaga pekerja mereka juga mahir. Dan pada masa sama, satu poin lagi Nina adalah pendigitalan dari segi teknologi dan sebagainya. Juga perlu diberi bantuan kepada SME ini untuk meningkatkan lagi produktiviti mereka dan mengurangkan aspek seperti menggunakan lebih tenaga buruh, lebih menggunakan lebih pada multitasking, meningkatkan produktiviti untuk setiap pekerja dan sebagainya, Nina.
Dan menurut kepada World Bank dan MEA juga sama-sama ada menyebut naratif Malaysia resilient dengan growth sekitar ataupun pertumbuhan sekitar 4 hingga 5%. Pada hemat Prof, cukupkah 4 hingga 5% ini sebagai new normal untuk Malaysia? Atau kita sebenarnya perlukan sasaran lebih tinggi untuk selesaikan isu gaji, produktiviti dan pelaburan yang dekat dengan hati rakyat ni? Dan itu satu. Keduanya, apa antara dua lagi risiko utama yang boleh spoilkan naratif resilient ini pada tahun 2025 hingga 2026? Adakah ia lebih daripada faktor luaran, global demand, geopolitik atau dalam negara seperti formasi fiskal cukai ini, Prof?
Baik, soalan pertama tu kalau saya nak katakan bahawa cukup ke 4 ke 5%, saya berkata bagi saya 4 ke 5% adalah satu data yang sesuai atau pertumbuhan yang sesuai dengan keadaan Malaysia, kerana itulah meletakkan Malaysia kita negara yang kedua pertumbuhan tertinggi di Asia Tenggara selepas Vietnam, dan kita telah melebihi untuk KDNK ketiga misalnya, suku ketiga kita telah pun melebihi Indonesia. Jadi ada baik dan buruknya. Bagus kalau dia terus meningkat, tapi buruknya adalah nanti kita punya enjin ekonomi itu menjadi panas. Jadi apa yang berlaku bila ia terlalu naik, terlalu cepat dan pantas, kita menghadapi isu-isu seperti kadar inflasi yang tinggi, peningkatan harga barang dan sebagainya. Itu yang kita elakkan. Pada sekarang ini, dengan kadar pengangguran di bawah 3%, kadar inflasi 1.4%, pertumbuhan hanya 4 dan 5%. Kita mahukan pertumbuhan yang seimbang. Bukan kita nak bekerja-kejar atau berlawan-lawan negara lain, tapi kita harusnya mempunyai satu situasi ekonomi yang sesuai untuk negara kita berkembang. Pada masa yang sama juga kita cuba mengelakkan pelbagai lain. Okey, soalan yang kedua, Nina, di mana Nina bertanyakan apakah spoiler dua risiko utama ni kan. Saya lebih nampak kepada isu-isu global sebenarnya. Kita faham perang tarif China dan Amerika Syarikat sebenarnya belum berakhir. Dia masih lagi bergantung pada negosiasi antara kerajaan China dan juga kerajaan Amerika Syarikat. Sekiranya berlaku lebih daripada yang kita anggarkan, ia mungkin memberikan kesan yang buruk kepada perdagangan dunia, dan ia boleh memberikan satu setback kembali kepada keseluruhan perdagangan dunia maupun kepada kita. Dari segi domestik ekonomi, saya tak terlalu bimbang kerana kita dari segi dasar fiskal kerajaan maupun dasar monetary berada dalam situasi yang mampan, yang resilient, dan kita melihat pertumbuhan ekonomi cukup bagus. Dan apatah lagi dengan tahun melawat Malaysia dan dengan pengukuhan dengan pelbagai lagi banyak lagi pelancong asing datang ke Malaysia tahun ini, mungkin hingga 40 juta disasarkan untuk tahun 2026. Pada masa yang sama juga kita melihat pengukuhan nilai ringgit ya. Pada sekarang hari ini mungkin RM4.12, RM4.13 berbanding dulu sehingga RM4.50. Jadi kita melihat banyak aspek-aspek positif pada ekonomi domestik, tetapi pada yang sama kita cukup haruslah aware, haruslah melihat bahawa kita juga merisaukan kita adalah faktor-faktor seperti geopolitik, perang dagang dan sebagainya, Nina.
Okay, baik, saya nak ucapkan terima kasih kepada Profesor Major Dr. Aimi Zahaludin Abdul Rashid, merupakan penganalisis ekonomi UNIKED LBSSku, kerana bantu kami faham bagaimanakah lanskap ekonomi tempatan untuk setakat ini, dan apakah antara risiko-risiko yang perlu kita teliti bukan sahaja di peringkat domestik tapi sehinggalah ke peringkat global yang mampu membentuk iaitu hala tuju masa depan ekonomi selepas ini. Sekali lagi saya nak ucapkan terima kasih, dan kita akan beralih kepada perkembangan seterusnya melihat kepada Persekutuan Majikan-Majikan Malaysia MEF menyeru agar pindaan Akta Pertubuhan Keselamatan Sosial Perkeso 2025 dilaksanakan secara seimbang dan mampan walaupun terdapat penambahbaikan ketara yang diperkenalkan. Presiden MEF Datuk Dr. Syed Hussein Syed Husman berkata, pindaan ini termasuk perlindungan 24 jam, faedah yang dipertingkatkan serta sokongan mobiliti dan latihan baharu kepada pekerja. Beliau menegaskan pelaksanaan pindaan perlu disokong oleh perancangan kewangan telus dan kajian aktuari yang tepat bagi memastikan kemampanan dana perkeso dalam jangka panjang. MEF mengalu-alukan allowance mobility dan sokongan latihan, namun menekankan program latihan mesti selaras dengan keperluan industri dan memberi keutamaan kepada kemahiran berimpak tinggi. Walaupun kadar caruman pekerja kekal, MEF meminta ketelusan mengenai asas aktuari bagi sebarang peningkatan caruman serta garis masa pelaksanaan yang jelas. MEF turut menyeru kerajaan dan perkeso memperkukuh libat urus dengan majikan, menyediakan latihan mencukupi dan meningkatkan sistem sokongan digital. MEF menekankan bahawa pelaksanaan pindaan ini mesti praktikal supaya tidak menimbulkan kesan tidak dijangka kepada majikan dan pekerja. Kerajaan melihat pelibatan Malaysia dalam BRICS adalah selari dengan usaha memacu ekonomi negara untuk berkembang dengan lebih pesat, stabil dan berdaya tahan. Kementerian Luar Negeri dalam jawapan bertulis kepada Parlimen berkata, BRICS menawarkan potensi besar untuk Malaysia mengeksport minyak sawit getah, elektrik dan elektronik dan perkhidmatan seperti pelancongan dan penjagaan kesihatan. Di samping akses pasaran, BRICS membuka ruang untuk kerjasama industri khususnya dalam bidang tenaga, mineral kritikal dan teknologi yang sejajar dengan Pelan Induk Perindustrian Baharu 2030 dan Pelan Hala Tuju Peralihan Tenaga Negara. Kerjasama sebegini menyokong aspirasi Malaysia dalam pertumbuhan hijau, transformasi digital, tenaga boleh baharu dan pembangunan industri bernilai tinggi. Kementerian itu berkata demikian bagi menjawab pertanyaan Lim Guan Eng, PH Bagan yang ingin tahu status permohonan Malaysia menyertai BRICS dan manfaat ekonomi dan kewangan dengan menyertai blok ekonomi itu. Kementerian Luar Negeri berkata jumlah perdagangan Malaysia dengan negara anggota BRICS bagi tahun 2024 telah mencapai RM818 bilion iaitu 35.2% daripada jumlah perdagangan global Malaysia dengan nilai ekspor mencecah RM334.85 bilion iaitu 45% daripada jumlah ekspor global Malaysia. Malaysia sebagai pengerusi ASEAN telah menyumbang secara signifikan kepada tindakan menyempurnakan rundingan mengenai perjanjian kerangka ekonomi digital DEFA sepanjang tahun 2025. Sehubungan itu, Ketua Pegawai Eksekutif ASEAN Strategy and Leadership Institute ASLI Nina Rozman berkata, perjanjian berkenaan dijangka akan dapat dimuktamadkan pada tahun depan.
Usaha untuk integrasi ekonomi, contoh ASEAN Economic Community, telah lama bermula. Namun pada tahun 2025 kita lihat perjanjian ataupun movement towards DEFA, Digital Economy Framework Agreement, telah pun hampir sampai ke penghujungnya. Dan DEFA ni dijangka akan dapat dimuktamadkan pada tahun depan di bawah kepengurusian Filipina. Namun ia telah boleh katakan ditolak dengan cukup agresiflah pada tahun ini di bawah ASEAN. Dan menurut MITI adalah dianggarkan bahawa nilai ekonomi yang akan terhasil daripada DEFA adalah lebih kurang 2 trilion US dollar menjelang tahun 2030, dan dia dari segi kelebihan ataupun upsides dia pelbagai lagi lah dari segi penciptaan pekerjaan dan sebagainya.
Beliau berkata demikian dalam program Agenda AWANI pada Isnin. Dalam pada itu, Daniel berkata sidang kemuncak ASEAN ke-47 juga mencipta sejarah tersendiri sebagai persidangan pemimpin dunia terbesar sepanjang tahun ini. Malaysia telah menyerahkan kepengurusian ASEAN kepada Filipina pada 28 Oktober lalu seusai sidang kemuncak ASEAN ke-47.
Keselamatan cyber bukan lagi isu teknikal semata-mata, tetapi satu keperluan strategik untuk negara dan organisasi. Mulai 1 Disember 2025, rakyat Malaysia akan menikmati keselamatan yang dipertingkatkan apabila semua syarikat telekomunikasi mula mengintegrasikan teknologi pengesahan identiti MyDigital ID ke dalam aplikasi mudah alih mereka. Inisiatif peringkat nasional ini bagi melindungi pengguna daripada panggilan skam, kes penyamaran dan penipuan identiti yang sering bergantung kepada kad SIM tidak disahkan atau disalahguna, sekaligus memastikan setiap nombor telefon mudah alih dipautkan kepada identiti digital yang sah dan dipercayai. Kita akan bersama Presiden Persatuan Pengguna Cyber Malaysia MCCA Muhammad Sirajuddin Jalil untuk mengulas lanjut tentang pendekatan ini. Saya nak ucapkan terima kasih Siraj. Dengan pelaksanaan MyDigital ID di semua peringkat telekomunikasi ini, apa impak langsung yang dilihat akan memberi kesan terhadap kadar penipuan identiti dan skam di Malaysia?
Okey, terima kasih Nina. Basically, penjenayah cyber ni dia akan tertumpu kepada dua perkara lah. Pertama adalah untuk membentuk cara mereka nak mencapai internet ataupun nak berkomunikasi itu dengan menggunakan identiti palsu. Yang kedua, mereka akan menggunakan maklumat perbankan mule yang mana mereka akan pergunakan orang lain untuk tujuan transaksi penipuan tu tadi. Jadi hari ini kita dah lihat bahawa MyDigital Identity telah membawa pembaharuan dan juga mereformasikan kaedah pendaftaran SIM kad prabayar tertumpu kepada prabayar, kerana SIM kad prabayar ni merupakan elemen terpenting kepada penjenayah cyber untuk mereka berkomunikasi dengan pengguna ataupun mangsa. Jadi that's why agak lama isu ni sebenarnya Nina. Saya ingat Astro pun pernah melaporkan laporan yang dikeluarkan oleh pihak MCMC berkaitan kompaun yang dikenakan terhadap syarikat telekomunikasi kerana gagal menyelia soal pendaftaran SIM kad yang dipalsukan. Dan hari ini bermulanya proses untuk mereka mengadaptasikan pendaftaran SIM kad prabayar menggunakan MyDigital Identity melalui aplikasi-aplikasi penyedia perkhidmatan masing-masing lah. Dan kita nak tengok dan unjuran daripada mekanisme ini, sudah pasti penjenayah pun akan terus mencari jalan bagaimana mereka nak terus mengeksploitasi kaedah telekomunikasi ini. Tetapi sekurang-kurangnya satu usaha yang drastik dan juga yang lebih jelas di peringkat kerajaan itu berjaya diterjemahkan. Dan saya yakin MyDigital Identity ini juga merupakan mekanisme keselamatan cyber ataupun perkhidmatan yang ditawarkan oleh pihak kerajaan kepada pengguna. Dan ada sedikit kadang-kadang salah faham di kalangan pengguna itu sendiri bahawa MyDigital Identity ini ingin mengumpul data dan sebagainya. Saya nak tegaskan juga bahawa MyDigital Identity ini bukanlah satu mekanisme untuk mencerap data pengguna. Sebaliknya, ia adalah satu mekanisme kunci keselamatan supaya pengguna dapat mengakses perkhidmatan dalam talian, apa-apa perkhidmatan dalam talian dalam negara kita, khususnya di peringkat kerajaan, supaya mereka selamat. Selain daripada mereka hanya perlu mewujudkan ID dan password. Jadi dalam konteks telekomunikasi ini, maknanya lepas ni kita sendiri pun boleh semak sejauh mana ada orang lain kalau menggunakan identiti kita untuk tujuan pendaftaran SIM kad palsu itu. Jadi ini adalah satu penanda aras baharu dan juga memudahkan pengguna untuk membuat semakan secara persendirian melalui aplikasi MyDigital Identity.
Dan kita tahu tujuannya adalah untuk memastikan keselamatan untuk setiap pengguna tu. Tapi untuk setiap pengguna kita tahu concern dia pengguna biasa ke ataupun tidak, ramai risau tentang soal privacy dan data peribadi. Dan dalam konteks MyDigital ID tu, macam mana kita nak yakinkan pengguna ini tentang platform ini adalah selamat dan kita dapat memastikan keamanan. Sebab kalau kita lihat, mungkin ramai yang tak daftar sekarang ini sebab mereka bimbang kerana mereka risau atau faktor luaran. Tapi untuk mempercayai method ini pun mereka memerlukan kepercayaan.
Okey, MyDigital Identity ini diselia oleh agensi keselamatan cyber negara itu sendiri. Yang mana pihak kerajaan pun kita lihat tidak melepaskan soal kerisauan itu. Jadi fungsi pucukuasa itu diletakkan di bawah NAKSA ataupun Agensi Keselamatan Cyber Negara itu sendiri. That's why soal digital ni tak ada orang boleh bagi jaminan 100% bahawa ia garanti selamat. Dan banyak insiden syarikat gergasi sendiri pun ada berlakunya insiden kebocoran data, baik apa sajalah kan syarikat-syarikat gergasi ini, termasuk platform media sosial itu sendiri. Jadi dalam konteks negara kita, penyedia perkhidmatan itu adalah kerajaan sendiri. Sudah pasti ia menjadi satu tunjang utama yang menjadi perhatian pihak kerajaan. Dan kerisauan pengguna itu ada asasnya. Kita tak menafikan soal kerisauan melibatkan kebocoran data, dan concern pengguna itu sebenarnya menjadi imbangan ataupun check and balance pada pihak kerajaan untuk meneliti setiap masa soal pengoperasian MyDigital Identity itu sendiri. MyDigital Identity tidak mengumpul data, sebaliknya dia hanya menggunakan data daripada Jabatan Pendaftaran Negara, tetapi mekanisme teknikal sebagai kunci masuk kepada aplikasi-aplikasi ataupun penyedia perkhidmatan digital yang lain. Itu sahaja. Dia tidak seperti MySejahtera, tidak seperti Budi Madani, tidak seperti Padu, yang mana ada banyak sesi proses untuk kita memasukkan input-input tertentu. Sebaliknya MyDigital Identity ini cukup dengan kita membuat pengesahan biometrik di kios-kios yang disediakan oleh MyDigital Identity itu sendiri. That's why soal pengumpulan data, saya tak nampak ada pengumpulan data yang baru. Sebaliknya dia menggunakan data sedia ada yang disediakan oleh Jabatan Pendaftaran Negara.
Dan saya nak cerita tahu ancaman cyber hari ini bukan sekadar scam call tetapi juga ransomware, APT iaitu Advanced Persistent Threat, kebocoran data, dan melihat kepada pendekatan identiti digital seperti ini. Adakah ia sudah cukup ataupun kita perlu tindakan yang lebih menyeluruh untuk memastikan setiap pengguna termasuk dengan syarikat telekomunikasi ini dapat mainkan peranan mereka yang lebih cekap dalam memastikan keselamatan cyber itu sendiri?
Sudah pasti tak cukup kerana aspek jenayah cyber bukan hanya melibatkan teknikal, dia juga melibatkan social engineering. Dan tahapan social engineering itu hari ini tidak hanya menjurus kepada individu, bahkan berlaku insiden-insiden yang melibatkan social engineering terhadap organisasi. That's why pihak telekomunikasi ini kita nak memujilah kerana mereka mengambil sikap ataupun accountability soal jenayah cyber ni dengan memilih untuk bekerjasama dengan pihak kerajaan untuk memastikan fungsi MyDigital Identity itu dilaksanakan bersama dengan aplikasi mereka. Dan kita berharap supaya pihak syarikat telekomunikasi juga dapat memudahkan soal birokrasi apabila proses untuk pihak penguatkuasa yang lain sebagai contoh untuk melakukan siasatan. Sebab pernah ada kekangan soal melibatkan data, perkongsian data dan sebagainya, dan kita telah pun ada, pihak kerajaan sendiri pun telah ada akta baru melibatkan perkongsian data, dan data ini penting apabila satu-satu siasatan nak dilakukan terhadap jenayah cyber ni yang bersifat anonymous ataupun ada elemen anonymity itu sendiri, sudah pasti akan menyukarkan pihak berkuasa untuk membuat siasatan. That's why antara komponen penting dalam jenayah cyber ini adalah IP address ataupun maklumat IP itu yang perlu dikongsikan oleh pihak telekomunikasi. Jadi ada banyak lagi mekanisme kehadapan ini yang perlu dirangka dan juga dibentuk dan dilaksanakan bersama. Dan untuk menangani jenayah cyber ini perlu ada shared responsibility. Maknanya sekarang kita tengok kerajaan dan juga pihak swasta berganding bahu. Di peringkat pengguna sudah pasti memainkan peranan terpenting kerana pengguna merupakan sasaran utama penjenayah cyber untuk mereka mendapatkan laba habuan daripada aktiviti jenayah mereka.
Baik, saya nak ucapkan terima kasih kepada Sirajuddin Jalil, Presiden Persatuan Pengguna Cyber Malaysia MCCA kerana bantu kami faham bagaimanakah MyDigital ID ini dari sudut peranan baharu syarikat telekomunikasi dalam meningkatkan pertahanan cyber. Dan bukan itu saja, serta bergerak ke hadapan, kita akan membincangkan bagaimana pertahanan cyber dalam ekonomi digital daripada pelbagai sudut dan aspek bergerak ke hadapan. Dan saya nak ucapkan sekali lagi terima kasih kepada Sidik, dan setiap perkongsian ini akan kami rangkumkan dalam astro.com dan di semua platform digital Astro AWANI. Jangan ke mana-mana, banyak lagi laporan yang akan kami bawakan lepas ini.
Essences melembutkan dan menyilatkan semula rambut anda dengan 100% pati tumbuhan sebenar seperti minyak argan dan aloe. Menutrisi secara mendalam untuk rambut lembut dan berkilat semula. Bebas daripada paraben, parafin dan pewarna. Herbal Essences. Kini anda boleh stream hiburan tanpa henti dan Netflix hits dengan Astro One.
Mungkin ini permulaan yang terbaik untuk aku pikir dulu.
Kau tak payah nak berlakon dah. Get it together. Balik harga.
나한테 유혹당했거든.
She will be mine.
Today we fight for our future!
This thing, it ties us together forever.
Dapatkan Astro One Entertainment dan Netflix pada harga istimewa di aplikasi My Astro sekarang.
Hello and welcome to Niaga Spotlight with me, Tamina Kausji. Niaga Spotlight takes us through the week in economic analysis and future affairs. Now today on analysis, our spotlight is on, of course, the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, or IDIVAO 2025, looking in particular at marriage migration and economic impacts. Now, as we mark IDIVAO 2025, we widen the lens. Gender-based violence is not only what happens in homes and on screens. It also lives in the rules that decide who can work, who must depend, and who is kept invisible in the economy. That is economic violence, the kind built quietly into systems, and marriage migration is one of Malaysia's clearest examples. We have an estimated 200,000 binational families in the country, yet the policies which govern their lives still rely on archaic assumptions about dependency as well as control. Highly qualified foreign spouses, many with degrees and years of professional experience, are kept out of the workforce because of restrictive employment pass conditions or employer confusion about their right to work. New research by Family Frontiers Malaysia shows that only a small fraction manage to secure formal employment even after years in Malaysia. The economic cost is real. World Bank modelling estimates between 10 to 15 billion ringgit in potential GDP is lost every year due to underemployment and administrative barriers faced by skilled residents, including such non-citizen spouses. When these women cannot work, the entire household absorbs the strain. When families leave for countries with clearer pathways, Malaysia loses existing and future talent too. And this is where IDIVAO matters. When a woman's right to safety is tied to her right to work, to live independently, and to plan her future without fear of visa lapses or sponsorship withdrawal, then the issue is no longer about immigration rules. It becomes an issue of dignity, resilience, and the kind of economy Malaysia wants to build. So, if Malaysia has the talent, the families, and the evidence, what is stopping us from designing a system that reflects our ambitions? Welcoming to the studios for this very timely discussion, Patricia Lau, Research and Policy Coordinator with Family Frontiers, economist Dr. Melati Nungsari, together with Dr. Nadine Rupert, wildlife conservation biologist and a non-citizen mother of Malaysian children. A very good morning to you all. So getting the discussion started straight off. Patricia, perhaps let's frame this a little before we launch into talking hard facts. What were the parameters of Family Frontiers' new research report? Tell us more.
Thank you, Tamina. So this research was done in the last quarter of 2024, and it used mixed methods, but bearing more towards the qualitative method, where we looked at non-citizen wives of Malaysians residing in the country, in Malaysia. And the objective of the research was to map migration pathways, the legal landscapes, and the key challenges that they face while living here in Malaysia.
Right, exactly. So now this is research that has also come out of the breadth and the depth of the work that Family Frontiers is very deeply involved in. Now let's look at what are some of the financial risks, perhaps the top two, which are binational families that have been studied actually repeatedly report and inform you about.
Okay, I think it's important to first to set the scene.
Yes, please.
For people to understand that securing permanent residence is very challenging and it's often a very prolonged process.
Arduous process, yes.
And so while waiting to be eligible for PR or for a decision to be made on their PR, they will need to hold what we call a long-term social visit pass, an LTSVP, with validity that ranges from 1 to 3 years, 6 months in some cases. And LTSVP holders face incredible barriers to employment. First is that the LTSVP has a statement of prohibition printed on the sticker or the piece of paper.
Right.
Which says any form of employment is strictly prohibited. Now, non-citizen spouses can apply for an endorsement with immigration, and then that statement will be struck out. However, it's a bit of a catch-22 because to apply for the work endorsement, you will need to have a offer letter, a job offer from a prospective employer. However, many employers, upon seeing this statement of prohibition,
right,
they are very reluctant. Many do not understand the processes, and
or wouldn't want to commit to a complicated process.
Yes, exactly. And so, as a result, many non-citizen spouses they struggle to find work, and many are forced to take up jobs that do not match their skills or their professional training. I think for women in our research, just over half of them who were surveyed are not employed. A lot of them are carrying out unpaid care work in the home. Whether by choice or otherwise. Some have indicated that they have withdrawn from seeking work, I think faced with a lot of discouragement as policies continually shut the doors in their face.
Exactly. So perhaps briefly then, what specific policy instrument might Family Frontiers recommend to mitigate these risks that have been long existing and that I think in 2025 we can no longer take for granted due to the economic exclusion?
I think the simplest and the very first thing is the removal of the statement of prohibition to enable equal access to employment for non-citizen spouses with the LTSVP. I think it's very important to reform the PR process. So we have received news that there have been changes implemented by the immigration in terms of PR processing requirements and the processing times. And we welcome every improvement, every effort taken to improve the lives of non-citizen spouses. But I think we have to be clear that the policies for PR have to be clear and transparent, fair and equal to both men and women, not different requirements for different genders, reasonable processing time, reasons given for rejections. And I think this is very important. I think the rest will also maybe expand on this, to extend the PR categories for abused wives, divorcees, and widows.
That's right.
And in the interim, while they wait for PR processing, for example, to provide immigration passes to them that are longer term and give them the right to work. So currently the special category visas for neglected, abused, divorcees and widows, they do not give them the right to work. And the validity of the passes are really, really short.
Well noted. Thanks so much for, placing us very clearly around where we're anchoring this discussion. And of course, now I move to asking Dr. Melati. Now, of course, I hope that you'll be able to situate us from an economic modeling perspective, but also feel free to please tell us a little bit more about how this issue also has really deep roots and far-widening branches. It also affects you personally, in a sense.
Thank you, Tamina. So, as the economist, I sort of feel compelled to show a couple of numbers. So I'm just going to walk through how I kind of estimated a little bit of the productivity or basically the economic growth lost. So just to summarize from the report from Family Frontier, so as of 2023, there were about 130,000 non-citizen wives of Malaysians holding active passes. Out of that number, we have that they're overwhelmingly prime age. So basically ages 65% are between 44 years old and very highly educated. So about half have bachelor's degrees and a quarter have master's or PhD degrees. Yet we know that from 2020 to 2024, only about 11.4% of this group were legally employed. And in fact, to add to what Pat said, 99% of respondents said that their legal status depended on their Malaysian spouse's sponsorship or presence at renewal, which very discourages kind of independent female participation in the labor force, which is, and I was telling Nadine earlier, a very standard textbook definition of brain waste, meaning that there's a lot of very skilled labor that is not being utilized very much. So if we look at basically just putting the numbers that I told you into actual, GDP numbers, so we know that the Malaysian GDP per worker currently is about 120,000 ringgit per year. And if we multiply that with assuming 60% of the people, women here on active passes eligible to work, let's say 60% is kind of the number we want to go for the female participation for this group, we see that if we multiply these two numbers, we get around 7 to 8 billion per year productivity loss, basically, from taking 11% to 60% of employment in this group. And this is about 0.5% of Malaysia's annual GDP. So, when you put it percentage, it doesn't seem very much. But to me, when we're talking billions
and we're talking individual families as well, from which those numbers are potentially drawn from.
Exactly. And this estimate is actually quite conservative, right? Because we know that when women work, they enrich the family more. We know that there's a lot of innovation gains, technological transfers between very skilled women and the local labor force. So I would say conservatively 7 to 8 billion. So that is a huge amount. And the routes are, varied. So we talk about, for example, labor market access is limited. So Pat spoke about the LT-SVP prohibition to work.
Yes.
This, if changed, can bring potentially very high and fast returns. So, for example, one thing that would be nice is for employment to basically be open up to all sectors, and for the requirement for spousal consent to work be removed as well.
Correct.
So currently, Malaysian spouses basically have power over their wife's livelihood,
to restrict it or to allow for it.
Exactly. Yeah. And so you can imagine if the marriage is tenuous in any way, then this really restricts access for the women. And we also have another lever, which is something that is longer term, very large, but takes a while. So, for example, having predictable PR timelines. We spoke about, processing times and stuff like that. And also the last thing I want to talk about is independent status once there are Malaysian children involved, or if they're X years of residence in the country. And I think Nadine will probably speak a little bit about that, which will both safeguard the child, but also safeguard, the family harmony, right? Because it shouldn't be that your labor market access is dependent on whether your marriage is successful. It should be more of a concrete relationship to the state.
Absolutely. And that is one that many of these non-citizen spouses quite often have due to the fact that they are already mothers to Malaysian children. But even if you are not a mother, it remains that you do have the human right and also the labor market participation right to be gainfully employed. Thank you very much, Dr. Melati. Dr. Nadine, at this juncture, moving into asking you, of course, about the relationship between life planning under the sort of perpetual contingency. But first, could you help situate us based on your lived experience within the system when it comes to all of these issues, in particular in relation to employment and residency?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Tamina. My background is that I have been living in Malaysia continuously for 16 years. However, I've been married longer. I've married my Malaysian husband in Germany. So we came back with our child, and I got offered a PhD position in Malaysia and continued successfully at a public university after my PhD as a lecturer for 11 years working here. My contract ended about 2 months ago. And during the time I was married, because currently I'm separated from my husband, we many times asked for the application forms to apply for permanent residency in my case. And many things happened. It's nothing I can go in detail, but I was never basically allowed to apply for PR. Now, fast forward, since I'm separated and divorced soon, maybe, there's no pathway also for me to get a PR, a permanent residency. Now, coming back to the continuous situation of not being sure how the family planning, how the next months will be developing is in my situation, very interesting, because my university that I worked for many years could only give me short-term contracts because I did not have a permanent residency. So
which also then naturally affects your career progression with regards to potential tenureship, etc.
So it's what Pat says, there's a catch-21 as well, because I could not obtain PR. My university could not grant me a permanent position as a lecturer. And of course, this is continuous after 1-year contracts, and maybe the longest I got was a 2-year contract. Life planning is revolving around this question: will I have an employment next year? Will I be able to contribute to the family? Especially in my situation, my husband was financially not able to contribute much, so most of the income was depending on me, and we have 3 children. So it is very stressful to live from contract to contract and not be able to do long-term planning. Can we afford buying a car? Can we afford to buy property? I could buy a car, take a loan in my name in the bank, which was good. However, I got very high interest rate, a very short period of paying off that loan because I'm a foreigner. Even though my husband was my grantor, I had to pay off my car in 5 years, which was a new car. You can calculate how much that was. So it is very challenging. And in the end of the day, after 10 years of employment with a public university, there was another challenge, because now after 10 years of service, the Ministry of Home Affairs needs to give special approval to extend my contract / extend my visa or work endorsement. In the beginning, I got a work endorsement on my long-term social visit pass, depending on my husband. However, after we got separated, he couldn't endorse my my visa. He couldn't come to extend my visa, and he couldn't give me work endorsement. So the immigration asked me to change that to a work pass or like an employment pass, which has implications as well, because once you change a visa type from a social visa to an expat visa, you have to leave the country. You have to be outside to wait. And that was in the midst of an employment, of taking care of 3 Malaysian children who go to school. I was asked to leave the country. So there are many challenges, and I think many individual families face very similar or very different challenges, but all in the context of insecurity, economically, but also just what is going to happen next if my visa is not going to be extended, what's going to happen to my children if I'm separated, if I have to leave the country. And in that sense, there is it's very stressful, to be honest. And every family has their own experiences, and that's my experience that I had.
And it's definitely a fair statement to say that it is unnaturally difficult. And with a 7 to 8 billion projected GDP annual losses, no small amount either to snigger at. Which brings me back to Patricia. Patricia, let's talk deeper about some of the structural vulnerabilities. Nadine had, of course, started off the entire discussion, but your research is also reporting that close to 15% of surveyed non-citizens' mothers have also faced separation from their Malaysian children. A little bit more about this of course, there's the human impacts, but it's tied in with the economic structures that anchor the vulnerability, right?
Yes. So because of how the immigration passes are tied to dependency to the spouse, if the marriage breaks down, etc., the risk of family separation is great. Many spouses have been forced to leave the country because they have no viable passes to remain in Malaysia.
No legal means
remain
resident.
No pathways given to them. And so that leads to the risk of family separation. And so I think in light of this, immigration policies really need to be viewed from a gender and family lens, that it has to be gender responsive, it has to be family centered. It must place the interest of the child as well, and the spouse. And in our research, not just in Malaysia, but in the context of marriage migration in the region, around the world, is highly gender specific. So women make up most of marriage migrants in the world.
That's correct, globally, not just in Malaysia.
Yeah, not just in Malaysia. And so the impacts are gendered, and women are disproportionately affected. And so policies must take that into account when we think about how do we provide, provisions and pathways for non-citizen spouses to be with their family in this country.
Exactly. Now, you had also, of course, spoken a little earlier about redesigning the spouse visa regime to actually decouple legal status from, of course, the spousal sponsorship, as particularly in cases where there might be abuse or perhaps even separation and divorce involved. But this would also require a monitoring mechanism. What are some thoughts around what can be put in as a framework, just to put it out there so that those listening, especially the policymakers, are able to grasp what it would take on a practical, operational level?
I think data collection is very important. You cannot make policies based on hearsay or what you think or what you assume. It has to be backed and based on evidence, on hard facts, right? So data collection is very important, even for us in Family Frontiers. Access to data, to official data, to us, it's not easy. It's not easy. The doors are often very close, are close to us. And I think not just data collection, but it has to be disaggregated by gender and made accessible to the public. And so through data collection, we can determine the changes and movements in, say, transitions in passes. And if the PR processes are improved, we should see an uptake or an increase in number of permanent residence applications. And also data on domestic violence experienced by non-citizen wives. And I think also maybe the other monitoring mechanism I can suggest is to have confidential channels for providing feedback and complaints. I think that's how you know whether it is working for the people that it's intended for.
Exactly. What I can also think of is the further dimension, which could be another hidden vulnerability, whereby you actually have gender-based discrimination related to status dependence, being that many non-citizen spouses then do not even report cases of abuse, and they silently endure it due to all the structural vulnerabilities associated with it. Thank you. Thank you for that, Patricia. Melati, moving back into looking at bureaucratic friction and informality when it comes to labor, situate us within the framework of marriage migration and how this is actually something which is almost an expected impact due to the way we are set up.
So I think the kind of like pulling back a little bit from the specifics of the Malaysian context, I think generally we all know that even without legal or visa constraints, women are going to have a much harder time being and returning to the workforce. We know that fertility rates are dropping, and I think that's not surprising given how difficult life is for all women involved. But also we know that women typically will be the ones doing primary childcare, doing all of the care work for the family, for the spouse, and the spouse's family as well, right? So if that is already kind of the default that we're working with, adding in any type of economic barrier to participating will make it significantly worse. And I typically don't like to, I feel like I always need to highlight the care aspect, because to me, I mean, people may not be formally working, but they're working.
Yes,
they're working very hard. It's just we don't count them in the formal numbers, which is very bad for us. But the point is that any sort of restriction will, in fact, kind of depress labor interaction at all. So informality is something that we know is difficult for a variety of different reasons, and primarily here for the gender aspect, it opens up women to exploitation on a variety of different aspects, right? Your informal employer doesn't have to pay you. You don't have any protection in terms of, if anything happens to you at work. Your children basically suffer if you are sick or ill and stuff like that. So I think that is something that ideally we would like to see not happen anymore in this context. But I also wanted to kind of mention, for Malaysia specifically, I think one thing that really struck me reading Pat's report was how non-transparent the entire process is.
Right.
So Family Frontiers, I think, in the report was urging for, PR access, and Nadine spoke a bit about this, to be given within 5 years of, settling in the country. I believe that was one of the recommendations, something like that. And so echoing the data part, DOSM has done a fantastic job in recent years making a lot of private data more transparent. I think the chief statistician is excellent and knows basically what to do with the public data. Why not do,
harness that data?
Yeah, and we can do it because we've seen DOSM do it before. So, let people know, for example, where you are in the process of applying. Do you have 2 more years to get to where you need to be? Do you have 1 more year? We cannot have blanket rejections for specific things that we don't even know why the visa got rejected. Like, why is one person's 6 months, why is one person's 5 years? So a bit more transparency will allow, I think, will not alleviate the problem, but in the short term could make, families a bit more secure in terms of how to plan forward. Because we know that people who feel more secure are more likely to contribute to the economy, more likely to raise happy, healthy children, which is a very important part that's forgotten here. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That brings me to it. It made me think of two things. For example, on one hand, you've got qualified non-citizen spouses. There needs to be actually sectoral data around which specific streams of employment or professional recognition that they could fall under. But also, if you are not qualified in a formalized level, then talking about upskilling programs, etc., because there are dozens of industries which require that skilled labor in Malaysia currently. And I'm sure there's plenty of stories when it comes to what the non-citizen spouses have actually shared for Malaysia. But Melati, perhaps before we finish over here, now, what kind of, let's say, indicators should Malaysian policymakers be interested in to actually look at this issue, but with a lens towards actionable solutions?
So I think one thing that is not typically collected in the Malaysian context is actually connecting the visa issues that the families are facing to outcomes of the child. So it was actually monitoring with Ministry of Education, because kids have to go to school, with the welfare department to understand basically like dropout rates. Are kids with one foreign parent suddenly not being able to come to school? Are there issues at school with health and with performance and stuff like that? And that should be fed back into tied basically directly to immigration issues that the family faces. And so that is something that I don't really think we are doing so much, because it's disruptive. Like I think Nadine talked about, it's disruptive to the family. It's understandable. And monitoring that, I think, will give a bit more context. And the second thing is, I would really urge whoever's watching this to read the Family Frontiers report. But I feel like this cannot be a one-time thing. It has to be something that is repeated over time to see whether things have improved, right? Because if Pat does this 5 years from now and it gets worse, not so good. But maybe we did something good, and then we made it easier for families to live here a peaceful, productive life. In that case, that's good. So I like to kind of see more repeated studies that give policymakers a bit more data on what's actually happening on the ground.
Thank you. Thanks so much for highlighting that, because the dimension of impacts on the children from such marriages as well is something that is completely invisibilized. But then again, those children, especially if, of course, they've been born in Malaysia, they are citizens, right? Could there be perhaps an institutional change, even if it was one singular thing, which might be able to yield an improvement, say, within the next calendar year?
Ooh, that's a difficult one. Next calendar year. I think, just going off of what Nadine was saying before, I think the thing that shouldn't be too difficult is the removal of the condition on the LT, the long-term social visit pass. That is something that I feel like is pretty easy to execute. And the next thing I think is to create, or at least have steps in the next calendar year to make it sure that women who are typically primary caregivers of the children, do not have to leave the country due to a collapse in the marriage or to abuse cases or to any sort of tension within the family, because that is deprioritizing the child, not only the woman, but the child. And so to me, I think because Malaysia is quite progressive in a lot of our child reform areas, that is something that I feel like we can push for, which is currently not in place.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, hopefully that is something which we can move towards. Dr. Nadine, to look and dig even deeper into public narratives around marriage migration. Now, what is often invisibilized, of course, is the direct impacts and how all of these legal, immigration-related and work-related restrictions and difficulties then shape power structures within the home. Tell us a little more, especially from your lived experience too, and also working within the system.
Yeah, thank you. Before I do that, I just want to add something before we lose that point. What Melati and Pat has said is very true. So the removal of the statement in the long-term social visit pass is important. However, I think just to give a little bit background as well, and that is my experience that I want to touch on, and then I will answer your question, is that currently, since I am not employed anymore with a Malaysian institution or employer, I cannot hold the employment pass anymore. So I am the single mother and caretaker of 3 Malaysian children. I have full custody, legal custody of the children. However, there is no pathway to apply for permanent residency, because for permanent residency, you either have to be married to a Malaysian spouse, you have to be the child of a Malaysian parent, or you have to be a highly professional, trained, skilled worker. And even with a PhD, I'm not falling under that category because it's a point system and you have to collect certain amount of points. There is no pathway to PR currently for a single parent, not just a mother, a single parent to Malaysian children who holds full custody, legal custody. And I think this is something that needs to change.
Grievous oversight, certainly, since the children are directly dependent on you.
Yes.
Let's also talk about the next stage, which is when those children reach age of majority.
Exactly.
Please.
So and if there's no permanent residency given, so currently I can apply for a 5 years residence pass. This is an offer that I will take because I'm still in the situation of changing my employment pass to another visa. With a residence pass, that is a 5-year valid pass, I'm allowed to work. However, a residence pass cannot give me a pathway to PR, to permanent residency either. So residence pass can be extended. There might be barriers to extension once the children are above 18. I don't know, my youngest son is 12, so I don't know what's going to happen in the next.
So the framework really marginalizes both when the children are below legal age and above legal age. Dr. Nadine, Dr. Melati, and Patricia, thank you so much for the enlightening conversation and your insights. Well, what we've heard is clear. When immigration rules block legally resident spouses from working or securing stable residency, the cost is carried by families and also by the Malaysian economy. The data points to 7 to 8 billion in average in lost productivity, rising vulnerability, and talent also then quietly leaving our shores. As IDEVAR 2025 reminds us, economic violence is not abstract. It is actually built into our systems, and systems can be changed. The question now is whether Malaysia is ready to align its policies with the human capital and family stabilities we say we value. That's all we have time for today. I'm Tamina Kausri, signing off for now.